Hello everybody, Dr. Lloyd here. This is the second video in our series, Human Anatomy and Physiology, Lecture 1. And we are starting Chapter 1. This chapter has a lot of principles that we are going to be using through all of the chapters. And so many of these principles are very important. They'll make great flashcards. Before I get to the content, I've got a couple announcements. The first one is that I was recently told that Labor Day holiday is Monday only. So it means that Saturday, that there is class, Saturday, September 2nd, this Saturday. Now, yesterday or the day before, I think I sent an announcement saying there was no class holiday weekend, Labor Day. Well, that was my mistake. There is class, and you're expected to make it. If you cannot make it to class, I expect an email before class. And so everybody should be accounted for before the Labor Day weekend. Okay, the second announcement is that quizzes and homework, I have decided, are going to be due at the exam for each section. So, for example, the exam on September 23rd, which is our first one, is going to be homework chapters 1 through 5. So the homework will be due at the exam. And this way, we're not going to wait till the last minute to do our assignments. It's really important to keep up with the reading, keep up with the studying, and we'll go from there. Okay, so the third announcement is we did finally get up and running with our course in Canvas. And so even if you have tried this process, I want you to try again to pair your accounts. And the way you do that is in Canvas, go to First Day Inclusive Access Course Materials Fall 2023. You should get to a screen that looks something like this, where you can launch your courseware. Now there might be a couple seconds, it's alright. This software takes a little bit of time to load. But then it should allow you to open Pearson and register, if you have not done already, for a new account. And then you would link your accounts. Now that's it. That's the process. And after you have done this, it should say account created and linked. And you should have access then to all of the electronic material. If you do not have access, please email me and we'll work with it. It's easier to email me than to email the help staff at HCC, because I know exactly what's going on with our account. All right, so just make sure you keep me posted. I will see who logs in and who doesn't log in, because I'm given those logs. All right, well, let's go ahead and start. So Chapter 1, the human body. So the purpose is to introduce the disciplines of anatomy and physiology, to discuss the human body, discuss properties, and the concepts of homeostasis. So anatomy and physiology defines. Anatomy is the structure, whereas physiology is the function. Physiology is the how, anatomy is the where. There are different branches of anatomy. We've got embryology, developmental biology, cell biology, histology, gross anatomy. Gross would be without a microscope. Systemic anatomy, regional anatomy, surface anatomy, imaging anatomy, and pathological anatomy, which would be anatomy associated with disease. There are different branches of physiology. Molecular physiology, neurophysiology, endocrinology, which you will learn in the next class, the second class in the series. Endocrinology uses a lot of hormones. Then there's cardiovascular physiology, immunology, respiratory physiology, renal physiology, renal will be kidneys, exercise phys, and pathophysiology. Pathophysiology would be functional changes associated with processes like disease and aging. So anatomy and physiology are inseparable. And it's interesting that function reflects structure. So there is a principle known as complementarity of structure and function. But we can look at an example, looking at our teeth. The front teeth are the incisors, ideal for cutting, like scissors. And then the rear teeth, the flat molars, are ideal for grinding up the food. And so this is complementarity, structure and function. They complement each other. Some of the complementarity with different organisms is quite obvious. For example, you look at a dog. What does a dog have? Very big ears. Well, the dog can hear very well. So that's complementarity of structure and function. So the human body is very organized from the smallest chemical level to the organism. And the levels of organization are chemical, cellular, tissue, organ system, and organism. And so chemical will be the atoms, the molecules, the organelles. We're going to get to that in subsequent chapters. Cellular, well, there's a single cell, but tissues are made up of cells strung together with a similar function. Then organs are made up of tissues that are strung together. Organ system are made of organs that work closely to make a system. And then the organism is made of the organ systems combined to make the whole organism. So we've got your atoms, your cellular, tissue, organ, this is our organ system. So we were just looking at the blood vessel here. And now we're looking at the blood vessel, blood, and heart in a system. And then the organism. So they're necessary life functions. Maintaining boundaries, movement, responsiveness, digestion, metabolism, excretion, reproduction, growth. So maintaining boundaries is very important to maintain separation between internal and external environments. Now there are a couple of ways we do this. First of all, our cells have a plasma membrane which maintain a boundary from other cells. And then our skin maintains a boundary between us and our environment. And there's movement. Organisms move. There's skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and contractility refers to the movement down to the cellular level. Responsiveness, ability to sense and respond to stimuli. This is like when you touch a hot stove and you withdraw your hand to prevent injury. Control of breathing rate, which changes with your activities. And there's digestion, breakdown of foodstuffs, followed by absorption. Metabolism, all chemical reactions that occur in the body. There's the breakdown of molecules called catabolism, and the synthesis of molecules, called anabolism. Excretion would be the removal of waste from the metabolism and digestion. And so urea is a great example. Urea is in urine, and that contains the breakdown of proteins. Carbon dioxide is exhaled. That's a byproduct of metabolism, and then feces for unabsorbed food. Reproduction. At the cellular level, reproduction is the division of cells for growth and repair. At the organism level, reproduction is the production of offspring. Growth, increase in size of the body part or organism. So the organ systems, there are 11 of them. Each have their own functions. Now the organ systems are interrelated. For example, the respiratory system, which would be mainly the trachea, mouth, and lungs. This involves the uptake of gases and expel of gases, but these gases must be circulated, so the respiratory system relies on the cardiovascular system to circulate the gases. The digestive system also works with the cardiovascular system because the digestive system provides nutrients that then must be circulated to the cells in all the body. Now, the urinary system takes that blood of the cardiovascular system, filters it, and expels the waste. Okay, integumentary system. This is a fancy word for hair, skin, and nails. Skeletal system. Bones, joints, and ligaments. Muscular system. Muscles. And muscular system, it's not just movement, it's also facial expressions, maintaining posture, and the production of heat. Nervous system. This is the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves. The endocrine system involves many different organs with glands and circulating factors called hormones. The cardiovascular system. This is going to be the heart, the arteries, veins, and the blood. The lymphatic or immune system. This is the way that our body is cleaned of different pathogens. And we have white blood cells that are involved in immunity. The immune system is what's challenged when you get sick with a virus or a bacterium. Respiratory system. We've got the trachea, lungs, bronchus, nasal passage, the uptake of gases. Digestive system. There are many different organs here. We've got the esophagus, the liver, the stomach, the intestines, the rectum, and the anus. Digestive system is a tube, basically. It goes from your mouth all the way down. The urinary system. This is what eliminates all of our nitrogenous waste from different amino acids, but that's the kidneys, the ureter, the bladder, and the urethra. The reproductive system. We've got testes and ovaries that are made to produce offspring. Also mammary glands to produce milk to nourish the newborn. That would be in the female. Okay, here is a list of them. We've got integumentary, skeletal, muscular, nervous, endocrine, cardiovascular, lymphatic and immune, respiratory, digestive, urinary, and reproductive. Sometimes lymphatic and immune are separated, sometimes they're together. Okay, so let's go over those one more time. So the integumentary system, hair, skin, and nails, but it also includes oil glands. And the function is to protect the body. But also the integumentary system makes vitamin D, and we'll get into that, I think, chapter 5. And sensation, stores fat, provides insulation. The skeletal system, the bones, joints, cartilages, this is what supports the body. So in the skeletal system, we also are going to include ligaments and other connective tissues. Muscular system. We've got skeletal muscle, we've got cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and different body movements, walking, maintaining posture, production of heat. The nervous system, brain, spinal cord, and nerves. But also the nervous system contains these special senses, like the eyes and the ears. Now they do this by generating what's called action potentials. We will talk about that. Okay, so we've got muscle, which also includes tendons. Nervous, we've got that. Endocrine. When I say endocrine, you should think about hormones just immediately. So endocrine system are a number of hormone-producing glands like the pineal, the hypothalamus, pituitary, thymus, thyroid, parathyroid, adrenal, pancreas, ovaries, and testes. And these hormones are chemical messengers that will then float around until they get to the cell with a certain receptor, and then it'll be activated. Cardiovascular, blood, heart, blood vessels. Okay, we did the endocrine, cardiovascular. Let's go to lymphatic and immune. So the lymphatic and immune are the spleen, the thymus, the lymph nodes, and the tonsils. And so the purpose is really to filter what comes from the tissues back to the heart, and this involves a lot of white blood cells. Lymphatic and immune are part of your immune system. Respiratory, lungs, which you would start with the pharynx and the larynx, trachea, bronchioles, okay, digestive. Digestive system is a very long tube from your mouth to your anus, but it also includes salivary glands, it includes liver, gallbladder, and pancreas, which provide different digestive processes. Urinary system. Urine is made by the kidneys. Urine travels down the ureter into the bladder and out the urethra. So urinary system is elimination of waste from the blood. Now it also helps to maintain an acid-base balance in the body fluids, mineral balance, and the production of red blood cells. Okay, reproductive system. This is the gonads, and the function is to produce gametes, which are sperm or eggs. and also the release of hormones that regulate reproduction and other body processes, like the production of milk. Repro will be done in the second part of this class, or not this class, the next class. So for survival needs, humans need nutrients, oxygen, water, normal body temperature, and pressure. So the nutrients are chemical. It's for chemical energy and cell building. We will talk about this in subsequent chapters, but we've got carbohydrates, proteins, fats, minerals, and vitamins. So for oxygen, we need constant oxygen. We are constantly breathing. Water is the most abundant chemical in the body. Body temperature, we have to maintain 37 degrees Celsius, and appropriate pressure. Okay, homeostasis. This is a very important process, and we will talk about homeostasis every chapter, usually at the end of the chapter, when we're wrapping up what's going on with the different system. But it's the maintenance of a stable internal environment despite changes in the external environment. Homeostasis is a process that always needs to be adjusted. To maintain homeostasis, there are various variables that can change, like blood sugar, body temperature, body volume. Homeostasis involves three different components: the receptor, the control center, and the effector. So the receptor monitors the environment, responds to stimuli, and sends a message to the control center where there's a set point. You can think of your thermostat as an example. And this determines the appropriate response, and then the effector is the output from the control center, which is your response. Now, it could be that you want more. You want to do more of what you're doing. That would be a positive feedback. Or it could be, let's do less of what you're doing. That would be a negative feedback. Okay, so I've got negative feedback first. I'm going to show you a nice little GIF about it, but basically you've got a signal that shuts off a subsequent signal. Examples would be body temperature. So we will talk about this, but when you are cold, you shiver. When you're hot, you sweat. But you will, once you get to your temperature, you stop sweating, you stop shivering. Or blood glucose with insulin to maintain a steady state level of insulin in the blood. These are examples of negative feedback. So here, I'm going to skip this. Okay, so here's a good example of the balance that occurs in homeostasis. You have the stimulus, which produces a change in the variable, receptor, which detects the change. There's an afferent pathway, which goes up to the control center. So from receptor to control center via afferent. Then the control center evaluates it, sends a response down an efferent pathway to the effector. This is like the effector organ. But there's a balance in response. When the stimulus, when there's an imbalance in the stimulus, the receptor detects this, the control center integrates it, sends out a response, and this goes to maintain the balance. So in negative feedback, for example, If you are warm, if your temperature rises, the control center signals effector sweat glands to produce sweat. This then brings your temperature back down, and the receptors stop signaling. Similarly, if you're cold, your receptors detect this. Control center will then activate effectors like skeletal muscle to create shivering, to produce heat, and this brings you back to your set state. You're back in balance. Now, positive feedback is when you have a signal that leads to a greater signal. And this is a cascading or amplifying effect. A great example is what happens during labor, when you have stretching of the cervix and production of oxytocin and contractions, which lead to more stretching, which lead to more oxytocin, more contractions, more stretching, more pushing until the baby is produced. So this is a positive feedback mechanism meant to cascade or amplify as time goes until there's a certain product. Another example is the process in blood pressure. So let's say there's a tear in a vessel wall, receptor is activated, afferent pathway, platelets adhere to the chemicals, and the platelets will attract more platelets, which will adhere. They'll attract more platelets, and you get a positive feedback that's going to produce a clot to return or to stabilize blood pressure and stop the leaking of blood. And so this is a positive feedback where the signal leads to a little more signal. And then once it's fixed, the signal shuts off. So with homeostasis, disturbance is a risk of disease, and it contributes to changes associated with aging. So let's review a little bit. So all life processes involve metabolism, responsiveness, movement, growth, differentiation, reproduction. Homeostasis is a condition of equilibrium or balance in the body's internal environment. Body fluids and homeostasis. So the survival of our body cells is dependent on precise regulation of the chemical composition of the surrounding fluid. This is extracellular fluid. Okay, another look at control. So we've got the heating and shivering. This would be negative feedback, where you've got a receptor goes to a control center, and then you resume your normal temperature and the signal goes off. So we've got stimulus, receptor, control center, effector, response. So for negative feedback, let's see if we can activate this. We've got a signal from A to B, which leads to a smaller signal from B to A, which leads to a smaller signal from A to B. You see how is a negative feedback, so your original signal leads to a smaller signal. So you're not amplifying. It's a transient response that gets you back to your set point. With positive feedback, your signal is reinforced. So a greater signal is released right here. So we're amplifying, and this will lead to an even greater signal. So the example, a great example, is giving birth. So we've got stretching of the receptors, control center, activates the effectors to release oxytocin. You've got stretch, pushing, and more oxytocin. This amplifies and amplifies and amplifies until the baby is born. Okay, so once again, when homeostasis is disrupted, disease, disorder, and death is what will result. Okay, so if we look at anatomy, the anatomical position is when you're showing a picture of the body, and the body is erect with the feet slightly separated, palms facing forward with thumbs pointing away from the body. You should all be doing that with your hands right now. So this is the anatomical position. And there are various directional terms that we are going to look at. So this girl is in anatomical position. Her feet are slightly separated. She's facing forward. Her palms are facing forward with her thumbs out. And so from this, you can develop different regions. Cephalic, head, cervical, neck, upper limbs, arms, trunk, thoracic, abdominal, and pelvic areas. Lower limbs would be legs. Other regions, a number of other regions you can look at. The antecubital, carpal, palmar, number of different regions you can go through. I would really recommend spending some time with this slide and getting to know these words. Some of them you don't use too much, but it's really worth being aware of them at this point. Okay, so we've got body position. This is anatomical position. Palms forward. So there are different terms for orientation and direction. Superior, which would be toward the head, cranial. Inferior, be toward the tail, caudal. Anterior, ventral. Posterior, dorsal. So I'll show you another picture. It's a little bit better. Then we've got the midline and medial towards the midline, lateral away from the midline, or intermediate, where you would be more medial than lateral, more lateral than medial, somewhere in between. These make great questions. Okay, proximal, closer to the body part you're referring to. Distal, away from the body part you're referring to. Superficial would be external. Deep would be internal. Okay, this slide I really like because I just went through and I put down all of these. These should be on flashcards, okay? Lateral, away from the midline. Ipsilateral, the same side. Contralateral, the opposite side. Medial, midline. Superior, higher. Inferior, lower. Proximal, near the midline. Distal, away from the midline, or whatever your frame of reference is. Anterior is the front. Posterior is the back. superficial of the surface, deep, away from the surface. The skeleton can be divided into two different regions, axial and appendicular. Axial is going to be the head, neck, and trunk. Appendicular would be the limbs. Okay, we've got another figure looking at different regions. This is kind of a repeat, but there's a lot of good details in here. We looked at the palmar surface, and the back is the manus. This is the anatomical position. We're looking at the posterior view, or the dorsal view. Oops. Okay. So the different planes of the body are most commonly sagittal, frontal, which is also known as coronal, and transverse, which is also known as horizontal. So sagittal divides the body vertically into right and left parts. Mid-sagittal would be right down the middle. So a cut is made perfectly midline, where you have left and you have right. Parasagittal would be off-center. We're slightly midline, just a little bit lateral. So here is a good figure. We've got our sagittal section, which divides the body into left and right. Coronal or frontal, which divides it into front and back. And so that would be to separate like your face from the back of your head, would be a coronal plane. And transverse, top and bottom. There's also oblique, which is to cut at an angle other than 90 degrees. Okay, I do like this figure a little better. Okay, so we've got, this is a summary figure. Here is these are our sagittal sections that are going left to right. Mid-sagittal in the middle. Parasagittal would be lateral to the mid-sagittal. And oblique is at an angle, not quite transverse. Body cavities. So body cavity, or body contains internal cavities that are closed to the environment, and they're protected. So there's a dorsal body cavity, ventral body cavity. The dorsal body cavity has a cranial compartment and a vertebral compartment. So here we can see the body cavities. This is a sagittal section, so we can see cranial, this is the dorsal region, vertebral body cavity, thoracic cavity contains the heart and lungs, separated by the diaphragm. You then have the abdominal cavity, pelvic cavity. You can combine these to make the abdominal pelvic cavity. This is a ventral view where you're looking right at the front of the person. Now, thoracic cavity can be further divided. We'll review that in a minute. So the internal organs are collectively called the viscera. So when somebody is eviscerated, they lose their internal organs. Okay, the pleural cavities are what surrounds each lung. The mediastinum surrounds other thoracic organs like the esophagus and trachea. Pericardial cavity encloses the heart. The abdominal cavity contains the stomach, intestines, spleen, and liver. And the pelvic cavity contains the bladder, reproductive organs, and rectum. Okay, here is a good figure showing the different aspects of the thoracic cavity. We've got, here's the heart in the middle, surrounded by the pericardium. So this is the pericardial cavity, pericardium. And then the mediastinum, this part that is dotted. And the pleural cavities, there's a visceral and parietal pleura, all separated by the diaphragm. Something that's surrounding the abdominal cavity would be the peritoneum. Organs posterior to the peritoneum are called retroperitoneum. So peri means about or around. Retro means backwards or behind. Flashcards. Here's a good summary. We've got cranial, vertebral cavities, thoracic, abdominal, pelvic. Now there are imbalances or errors that occur in cavities, like when one cavity protrudes into another cavity. This is going to upset homeostasis and result in some kind of response. And sometimes the body's response is not sufficient, so surgery is required, or medicine. Okay, serosa, also called serous membranes. These are thin, double-layered membranes that cover surfaces. You have the parietal serosa, which lines the body cavity walls, and the visceral serosa, which covers the internal organs or the viscera. There's fluid between these double layers, and this is called serous fluid. So if you look at the ventral body cavities, we've got the pericardium, which is the heart, the pleura, the lungs, and the peritoneum, the abdominal pelvic cavity. Here we've got an example of the serosa associated with the heart. So peri is around. This is your pericardium. You've got a visceral pericardium surrounding the heart, and a parietal pericardium, which lines the chamber, or it lines the cavity, excuse me. And in between, there's a space which contains your serous fluid. Now, serous membranes can become inflamed. This can upset homeostasis. An example would be peritonitis. Okay, so this is a little bit of review. What are the three types of serous membranes? Pleura, which surrounds the lungs. Pericardium, surrounding the heart. Peritoneum, surrounding the abdominal cavity. Quadrants. So the abdominopelvic area has quadrants and regions. We've got the right upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, left upper quadrant, and left lower quadrant. Let's go backwards. Okay, so here we go. Here are the abdominal pelvic. We've got abdominal pelvic. And it's split really nicely into left and right upper and lower quadrants. Sorry about all that. Now there are different regions, which kind of like tic-tac-toe grid. I'm just going to show you a picture so we can go over it in a picture. Okay, here we go. So we've got the umbilical region, which would be the midline. The right lateral region, the left lateral region, lateral to the umbilical region. Above it, epigastric, epi above, gastric, stomach. Then you got your right hypochondriac and your left hypochondriac. Below the umbilical, you have your pubic region. And then your inguinals, your right inguinal region, your left inguinal region. This is the abdominopelvic regions. Flashcard, memorization. And when you look at these words, try to have them make sense. So if you don't know what a root is, the root of the word or whatever part of it, look it up. One thing we're going to do Saturday is look at our anatomical words and what they have in common. We'll do some memorization so we can really learn this stuff. So there are smaller cavities. There's the oral and digestive cavities, and nasal, orbital cavities, middle ear cavities. Also synovial, which would be joint cavities. Okay, was that too much? That's a lot. So really work on your notes. There are certain slides which are worth pausing on where I have provided a lot of summary information. And more summary information will be presented on Saturday. Okay, so I want you guys to have a great week. I'll see you Saturday, and then we'll have a good Labor Day weekend. All right, bye-bye.